A father looked his son in the eyes and said, "You built the system, but I own it." The son nodded, asked for a few days to prepare the documentation, walked out of the office with a smile, and drove home knowing he was carrying the admin passwords and encryption keys to the software that controlled absolutely everything. The following Friday, 65 employees went to the bank. The money wasn't there.
My dad fired me and gave my job to his mistress, so I took the software I built with me. My name is Dylan. I'm 31 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I was the Director of Operations and Solid Systems Administrator at Whitman Industrial Supply, a manufacturing company specializing in fastening components for the aerospace and automotive industries. Not a glamorous sector, but extraordinarily profitable when you have the right contracts and maintain consistent quality. My father, Marcus Whitman, founded the company in 1994. I was a baby. For the first 15 years, it was a small operation out of a warehouse in Ohio. A handful of employees, basic equipment, handwritten invoices, 2 people working 60-hour weeks just to keep the lights on. I grew up literally inside that warehouse. My mother used to set up a playpen in the corner of the office so she could watch me while she processed orders. My earliest smells were machine oil and heated metal. When I learned to walk, I'd wander the production floor watching the machinists work. They'd give me scrap material to play with pieces of metal and bolts that I'd organize into patterns on the ground. By 16, I could operate the NC industrial machines better than most of the full-time employees. My father would show me off to his friends at industry events, hand on my shoulder. "That's my son. Someday he'll take over all of this." 4th generation if you count my father's machine shop. Back then, those words meant everything to me, so when I went to college I didn't pick a major based on personal interest. I chose computer science with a concentration in business administration because I understood where the industry was heading. Factories wouldn't just depend on machines and labor anymore, they'd depend on automated systems, software that controls production, data that enables real-time decisions. Industry 4.0. I wanted to be ready for that shift. I wanted to bring Whitman Industrial into the modern era. I wanted to prove that my father's faith in me was justified, and that's exactly what I did. After graduating in 2015, I came back to work full-time. The company had grown to around 30 employees and was generating decent revenue, but the infrastructure was an absolute disaster. My mother had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer. Without her organizational skills, the administrative side had collapsed. Nobody had understood how much she held together until she wasn't there anymore. They were still using paper files. Production scheduling was done on a whiteboard that got erased and rewritten so many times it was barely readable. Payroll was calculated manually with chaotic spreadsheets. I found accounting errors going back 3 years. Customers were getting incorrect invoices. Orders were getting lost. Complete chaos. I spent the first 2 years rebuilding everything from scratch. I didn't buy standard software and adapt to it. I designed a completely custom enterprise system, tailored to the way our factory actually worked. A system that connected every area of the company. It tracked every component in the warehouse down to its batch number. It organized production by optimizing machine usage and automatically adjusting for maintenance schedules. It logged every quality control check. It centralized client relationships. It generated invoices automatically from real production data. It calculated payroll by integrating hours worked and benefits. It showed real-time reports so management could see what was happening in the company at any given moment. It wasn't fast. It took close to 4 years to develop, line by line, until it exceeded 200,000 lines of code. I started it while still in college and finished it after joining full-time. The system was called Whitman Core. My father thought it was a nice name when I presented it. He had no idea what he was looking at. To him, it was just computer stuff that made the screen show numbers. He didn't understand that I had built the complete nervous system of his company. Within 3 years of implementation, efficiency had improved by 40%. We reduced labor costs through better scheduling, eliminated order errors through automated verification, doubled our client volume without hiring additional administrative staff. Revenue went from $3 million a year to over $11 million. Suddenly, my father was playing golf with CEOs and getting invited to industry conferences as a visionary entrepreneur who had transformed his traditional manufacturing business into a model of modern efficiency. I never received credit for any of it, not publicly. In interviews, he talked about implementing cutting-edge technology and strategic modernization, as if he had personally designed the systems. I told myself it didn't matter. The company was doing well. Eventually, everything would be mine anyway. How naive. Things started shifting about 2 years after my mother died. My father started working late more frequently, business trips with very little actual business in them, coming home smelling like a perfume that was definitely not one my mother would have worn, started caring more about his appearance, joined a gym, upgraded his wardrobe. Pretty clear signals. I'm not stupid. I knew what was happening. I kept my mouth shut because confronting my father had never ended well for me. The man has the emotional intelligence of a cinder block and the temperament to match. Growing up, I learned fast that questioning his decisions led to lectures about respect and knowing my place. Then I met her, Serena Black. 34 years old. Blonde, former pharmaceutical sales rep. My father introduced her as his executive assistant at a company dinner about 18 months ago. She showed up in a dress that cost more than most of our floor workers earned in a week, attached to my father's arm like she'd been surgically grafted there. I knew immediately what she was. The way she looked at the company, the building, the equipment. She didn't see a business, didn't see the years of work and effort that had built something from nothing. She saw assets. During dinner, she asked my father questions about revenue, profit margins, and growth projections. These weren't questions from someone genuinely interested in the business. They were questions from someone calculating their own cut. If you've ever watched someone like this walk into a family business, drop it in the comments. 2 months after being hired as an assistant, she was already attending management meetings. 4 months in, she had a corner office that used to belong to our VP of operations before he retired. She redecorated it with expensive furniture and artwork that had nothing to do with manufacturing. 6 months in, she was making decisions about supplier contracts and employee schedules without consulting anyone. She fired 2 long-tenured employees because, according to numbers she barely understood, they were underperforming. She switched our primary supplier to a company that offered her a commission. The purchasing manager confirmed to me later that the new supplier's prices were actually higher, but Serena had ignored his objections. I mentioned this to my father exactly once. I tried to be careful, said something like, "Maybe we should involve someone from operations before approving these supplier changes, just to make sure we're getting the best value." My father looked at me like I'd just insulted his mother, face reddening, jaw tightening the way it always did before he started yelling. "Serena has a business degree and 15 years of corporate experience. She knows what she's doing. Maybe you should focus on your computer stuff and let the adults handle the business." The adults. He said that to his 30-year-old son who had built the systems that made the company function, to the person who had sacrificed his entire youth to turn a declining business into a profitable company. I let it go, because what else could I do?
Let the adults handle it. That sentence revealed everything. He never saw his son as a partner. He saw an employee, and employees are replaceable.
Over the following year, Serena systematically positioned herself as indispensable. She took over communications with our most important clients, relationships I had cultivated for years, took control of finances, replaced our accountant with someone from her network, restricted access to the company's books. Meetings I had always attended became executive level only. Information I needed to do my job properly suddenly became need to know. Projects I had led were reassigned to consultants from her network, and my father smiled and went along with all of it. He was completely blind to what was happening, or simply didn't care. He had an attractive woman telling him every day how brilliant and successful he was. What could compete with that? The first real warning sign came about 3 months ago. Serena hired a new consultant without telling me. He just appeared one Monday, a guy named Kevin, following her around while she asked questions about our network infrastructure. Mid-20s, well-dressed, that corporate office guy type who uses the word synergy with complete seriousness and thinks knowing Excel makes him a technology expert. When I asked what was going on, Serena smiled, that fake smile she always used, and said she was exploring options to optimize the system. I explained, with all the patience I could manage, that I had personally designed and maintained our entire technology infrastructure. I knew every line of code, every server configuration, every security protocol. Kevin couldn't optimize anything without my involvement because I was the only person who understood how everything worked together. Serena smiled at me the way you smile at a child who's just said something naive. "That's precisely why we need a backup, Dylan. What if something happens to you? The company can't depend on a single person. It's basic risk management." I wanted to say a lot of things. That maybe the company shouldn't have allowed one person to build everything without documentation or a replacement. That if my father had listened to the 3 proposals I'd made over the years about hiring more technical staff, we wouldn't be in this situation. I didn't say any of that, just nodded and told Kevin I'd be happy to walk him through the systems when he was ready. Over the following weeks, Kevin asked a lot of questions. He wanted network maps, system documentation, access credentials for various platforms. I gave him the basics. Surface-level information that anyone could figure out with a bit of research: server names, IP addresses, general architecture diagrams, access to non-critical systems. But when he started specifically asking about Whitman Core, the source code, encryption keys, how the core systems actually worked, I became extremely careful. Here's the important detail about Whitman Core. I built it on my own time with my own equipment before implementing it at the company. I wrote the original code in my apartment over 3 years while still in college. When I brought it to Whitman Industrial, I never transferred the intellectual property rights. There was no work-for-hire agreement, no assignment clause in my employment contract. About a year after implementing the system, when its value became clear, I proposed to my father that we formalize the arrangement. License the software to the company for a nominal fee. Get everything documented legally. My father dismissed it immediately. "We don't need lawyers in a family business. You're my son. This company is yours too. No need for paperwork." I remembered that conversation very clearly, because now it carried crucial weight. Even though the company used Whitman Core, I was still its owner. The source code, the architecture, the encryption protocols, all of it was mine. and without the encryption keys that only I possessed, nobody could access the core systems. Not Kevin with his consultant credentials, not Serena from her corner office, not my father, despite being the owner of the company. Pay attention to what happens next. 3 weeks ago, my father called me into his office for what he described as an important meeting about the company's future. Serena was already there when I arrived, sitting in one of the leather chairs like she owned the place, something she was about to confirm. My father was behind his desk, visibly uncomfortable. He couldn't look me in the eyes. That should have been my first signal. He was never uncomfortable about anything. He got straight to the point, handed me a folder with official documents. Dylan, we're making some structural changes to the company. We're eliminating the Director of Operations position and consolidating the functions into a new Chief Administrative Officer role. Serena will be taking on those responsibilities. I sat there looking at him. At first, the words didn't register. It was like he was speaking another language. Are you firing me? I finally asked. We're restructuring. Your position is being eliminated. It's not personal. Not personal. I had given 8 years of my life to that company, built the systems that made it function, worked 60-hour weeks for a salary that was half of what I could have earned in the private sector, because I believed in the family legacy, because I trusted him. And he was telling me it wasn't personal. What happens to Whitman Core? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Who's going to handle the systems? Serena spoke then. She had been watching me with a smug smile, clearly enjoying the moment. Kevin has been hired full-time as our new technology director. Going forward, he'll handle all technology operations. I almost laughed. Kevin had been at the company for a few weeks. He had barely scratched the surface of how our systems worked. He could no more maintain Whitman Core than he could perform brain surgery. He was the kind of person who thought CL was just a fancy acronym. Kevin doesn't know the systems, I said. He doesn't have the access credentials. He doesn't have the encryption keys. None of this is documented because nobody ever asked me to document it. Nobody bothered to understand what I actually do, my father shrugged. Then you'll do a full handover before you leave. Passwords, documentation, everything. Hor will schedule your exit interview for Friday. I looked at him, really looked at him. That man who had raised me, who had promised me the company would be mine someday, who had taken everything I built and was now handing it to his girlfriend as if I were nothing. As if all those years meant nothing, as if I meant nothing. What if I don't do the handover? I asked quietly. He leaned forward, looked me in the eyes for the first time since the meeting started. You built the system, but I own it. This company, this building, these employees, all of it is mine. You can cooperate and leave with a decent severance, or you can fight me and walk out with nothing. Your choice. He said it like he was explaining something obvious to someone too slow to grasp it, like he was doing me a favor by giving me options. I was quiet for a long moment, then I nodded. All right, I'll need a few days to prepare the documentation. My father smiled like he'd just won. Serena was already typing on her phone, probably announcing her new title on social media. Neither of them noticed that I wasn't angry, wasn't upset, wasn't feeling anything at all. I was already calculating.
He said, your choice, as if he'd given his son an option. He didn't realize the son had already decided before he ever walked into that room.
The 3 days that followed were interesting. I showed up to work as normal, was friendly with everyone, smiled at Serena in the hallway, chatted with my father about the weather as if nothing had happened. I told Kevin I'd prepare all the transition documentation and asked him to make a list of everything he needed to know. He handed me about 40 questions: network topology, software licenses, backup procedures, vendor contacts. I answered every single one in detailed, professional, thorough documents. Exactly what you'd expect from a responsible employee handling a transition. I even prepared training materials, walked Kevin through the more surface-level interfaces, showed him how to generate reports, how to check system status. I answered every question with precision. What I didn't give him was anything related to Whitman Core. Kevin assumed Whitman Core was just another enterprise software package, something you could understand by exploring the interface or looking up documentation online. He didn't understand that I had built it from scratch, that its entire architecture was proprietary, that without the encryption keys and admin credentials, the system was essentially a black box. The servers were still running. The software appeared to operate normally. The screen showed data and the buttons responded. But every truly important function was protected behind multiple security layers that only I could access. Inside that system was everything. The system that processed payments and moved money between accounts. The client database with 15 years of history and contract details. The programs that organized production on the factory floor. The connections that linked our system to client orders. All of it encrypted. And without the keys, which existed only in my head and on protected hard drives. I'd kept it home for years as backup. It was impossible to access any of it. On my last day, I walked through the building one final time, said goodbye to the employees I'd worked alongside for years, good people who had no idea what was about to happen. Aura from accounts receivable, who always brought donuts on Fridays. Naomi from Har, who had helped me navigate the bureaucracy when I first started. I felt something for them. Genuinely. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were just caught in the middle of something they didn't understand. At my exit interview, Har handed me a severance package and had me sign several standard confidentiality agreements. I signed everything without argument. None of those documents mention intellectual property or software ownership rights. My father was too cheap to have a lawyer properly review the contracts. They were standard boilerplate: don't disparage the company, maintain confidentiality about trade secrets. Whitman Core wasn't a trade secret, it was my property. As I was walking out the front entrance, Serena intercepted me in the parking lot. That self-satisfied expression, like she just pulled off the heist of the century, her heels clicking on the asphalt as she approached. No hard feelings, right, Dylan? This is just business. Your father and I are building something special here, and we need people aligned with our vision. I looked at her for a moment, that woman who had inserted herself into my family and convinced my father to get rid of his own son. Then I smiled. No hard feelings, Serena? I hope everything works out exactly as you deserve. She didn't catch the subtext, just smiled back and walked away, clicking her expensive heels across the pavement. I got in my car, turned my phone off, and slept better than I had in months. This is where it gets interesting. Don't go anywhere. The first call came Monday morning. I was making breakfast when Diana's name appeared on my screen. She sounded almost panicked. Dylan, I know you don't work here anymore, but something is wrong with the system. No production schedules are loading. The machines won't start their automatic sequences. Kevin has been trying all morning but can't access anything. I told her I was sorry, but I no longer worked at Whitman Industrial and she should contact the new technology director. Wished her luck and hung up. The second call came an hour later. The billing system was frozen. They had 36 invoices ready to send that day for completed orders and couldn't access any of them. The client database was throwing errors every time someone tried to pull up an account. Same answer. No longer my problem. The calls continued all day. Manufacturing coordination was down. The quality control system was inaccessible. Inventory was showing blank screens where thousands of line items should appear. The automated order processing system had stopped handling requests. One by one, every department that depended on Whitman Core discovered that the system was no longer granting access. What had happened wasn't complicated to understand if you knew how the system worked. Whitman Core hadn't stopped functioning. It had stopped allowing access. The authentication protocols I had designed detected that admin credentials weren't being validated according to the established cycle. The system expected an authorized administrator to periodically confirm that everything was operating correctly. When that didn't happen, after 72 hours without that verification, the system automatically locked down and encrypted all operational data as a security measure. It was a function I had built years earlier: protection against intrusions, hackers, attempts to steal data. If the system detected something abnormal, the lockdown prevented access to the real data. My father had no idea this function existed. He had never been interested in understanding how any of it worked. He only knew that the screen showed numbers and the business generated money. Now the screen showed nothing, and the business was grinding to a halt. By Tuesday, I had already received calls from 6 different people at the company. By Wednesday, the calls stopped coming from individual employees and started coming directly from my father. I let every single one go to voicemail. That day he left 7 messages, each one more agitated than the last. The first ones tried to sound friendly, almost casual. "Hey son, just checking in to see how you're doing. Kevin is having some technical difficulties. Could you give us a call when you have a moment? We might need your expertise on this." By the third message, the facading to crack. "Dylan, I need you to call me back. The system issue is more serious than we thought. We're prepared to pay consulting fees if necessary." By the fifth, there was no friendliness left. "Dylan, I need those passwords. Whatever you're trying to prove, you've proven it. Call me immediately." And by the 7th, he went straight to threats. His voice was unsteady. I couldn't tell if from anger or fear. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this is corporate sabotage. I'll have you arrested. I'll destroy you. Call me now." I saved every single message. Documentation matters, something my father never understood. On Thursday, I got a call from an unknown number. Almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up. It was Serena. She must have been using someone else's phone, knowing I wasn't answering calls from the company. "Dylan, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said calmly. "They eliminated my position and I left. That's not what we intended. We need access to the systems." Her voice was tight, barely containing the panic. "Kevin can't get anything to work. Payroll is due tomorrow and the payment system is locked. 65 people are waiting for their paychecks." "That sounds like a problem for your new technology director." "Dylan, be reasonable. People need to get paid. Whatever problem you have with me or your father, there are innocent people who depend on that money. Then maybe you should have thought about that before firing the only person who understood how the systems work, or before assuming you could take what I built without consequences." When she came back, her voice had changed. No trace of sweetness left. The mask had come off completely. "Your father is going to sue you into the ground. You will never work in this industry again. I'll make sure of that. I look forward to explaining to a judge that I own the intellectual property of Whitman Core and that I never signed any agreement transferring those rights to the company." Paused. "It'll also be interesting to mention that my own father verbally confirmed that arrangement when he said we didn't need lawyers in a family business. I'm sure the judge will find that relevant." Then I hung up.